I sensed my parents would seize my company, so I quietly moved my shares. A month later, their restructuring backfired. Ungrateful child. This is a family business. It's ours. I suspected my parents were planning to take over my company, so I transferred my shares. 1 month later, they announced a restructuring plan, then were shocked to learn I no longer held control. You've always been ungrateful. This is a family business. Everything belongs to us. Thank you for being here with me today. I hope you're having a wonderful day wherever you are. I'd love it if you could share in the comments which city or country you're watching from and what time it is there. Now let's begin our story together. I suspected my parents were planning to take over my company, so I transferred my shares. 1 month later, they announced a restructuring plan, then were shocked to learn I no longer held control. You've always been ungrateful. This is a family business. Everything belongs to us. My garage wasn't just a workspace, it was my sanctuary. It reeked of ambition and stale pizza, a scent that still brings a strange comfort here amidst the tangled wires and glowing screens. I poured every ounce of my youth, every waking thought into building Innovate Tech solutions. I was 24, fresh out of college, armed with a degree in computer science and a burning desire to prove myself not just to the world, but to the two people whose approval I craved most, my parents Martha and Richard Vance. It wasn't just a company. It was my blood, sweat, and a desperate yearning to prove I was worthy of their love, worthy of a place at their seemingly perfect family table. I remember those early days with a bittersweet ache, the relentless hours blurring into days, the ramen noodle dinners that tasted like triumph, the skeletal ache from working past dawn. I built Innovate Tech from the ground up, a testament to sheer grit and sleepless nights. My parents, successful in their own right in real estate, had given me a modest loan for some initial server equipment. A mere $10,000, a fraction of the investment I poured into it myself, but to them, it was the investment, the foundation upon which our family business would rise. Michael, darling, Mom would purr, her voice like warm honey. It's so important to keep things in the family. It's for our security. She'd say it with that smile that could melt ice and disguise a steel trap. I thought it was love. It was just control. So at their insistence and out of a deep-seated need to honor them, to be the dutiful son, I registered Innovate Tech as a family business. They took nominal board positions, never stepping foot in the garage, never understanding the lines of code or the algorithms that were my universe. Yet, at every social gathering, every country club event, they'd beam our son's company, our family business. The words were a hollow echo in my ears, a performance for their peers. Emily, my younger sister, a couple of years, my junior, seemed to glide through life on a silver platter. She was the golden child, effortlessly adored, effortlessly successful in a way that felt superficial. She went to the best schools, drove the newest cars, and never seemed to break a sweat. While I was tirelessly building, proving, hoping for a crumb of the affection she seemed to inherently possess, Emily was often by my parents' side, reinforcing their narratives, making me feel like an outsider looking in. She was a master of the subtle eye roll, the dismissive sigh, the gentle nudge that always pushed me to the periphery. I loved her. Of course, she was my sister, but there was always a quiet resentment, a constant feeling of striving against a current that always favored her. As Innovate Tech grew, the sweet smell of success began to curdle, tinged with a metallic tang of suspicion. My parents' visits shifted. They stopped praising, started scrutinizing. Are you sure this new marketing campaign is wise, Michael? Mom would ask, her eyebrows slightly raised, implying I was incompetent. Richard would demand financial reports, his voice tight, always comparing my spending to theirs, subtly implying I was reckless, irresponsible. Remember, son, this is our investment. We need to protect our family legacy. The of my servers used to be a lullaby. Now it felt like a growing static in my ears. A warning. Then came the hushed whispers. I'd walk into the living room and their conversation would drop like stones into a well. Their eyes would dart away, a forced casualness in their posture. I saw their car, the gleaming silver Cadillac, parked repeatedly outside a law firm. I didn't recognize miles away from their usual attorney. The shift in their demeanor towards me became undeniable. There was a new coldness, a demanding edge to their voices, a look in their eyes that felt less like parental affection and more like an appraisal of an asset. My chest tightened, a cold dread seeping into my bones. My stomach churned, a familiar knot of unease tightening with each hushed whisper. I overheard each stolen glance between them. The house I'd grown up in, a place of warmth and supposed security, suddenly felt foreign. Every family photo on the wall with their smiling faces and my own somewhat stiff grin like an accusation. I knew with a gut-wrenching certainty that something was profoundly wrong. The facade was cracking and the truth, whatever it was, felt like a lurking shadow. The first crack in their meticulously built facade came ironically from Emily. I found her one evening slumped in a plush armchair in her apartment, a half-empty glass of Pinot Noir clutched in her hand. Her perfect hair was slightly disheveled, her usually impeccable makeup smudged beneath her eyes. She looked for the first time truly vulnerable, truly human. "Mom was just here," she slurred. Her voice thick with something I couldn't quite place. Anger, resentment. She was on about how I need to find my footing and stop relying on them, as if she hasn't enabled me my whole life. It was a rare outburst of genuine frustration from Emily, who usually maintained an air of detached superiority. I saw my chance. "They've been acting weird." I started cautiously. "Secret meetings," whispering. "It feels off." She snorted a harsh, humorless sound off. "Michael, they're planning something big." She paused, taking a long swallow of wine. "I overheard them talking to Mr. Davies. You know, their lawyer. Not the family one, the other one. They were talking about restructuring Innovate Tech. Said you were too independent, ungrateful, said they needed to regain control before you ran it into the ground." Her words hit me like a physical blow. Each syllable, a shard of glass piercing my carefully constructed world. My mind reeled. Ungrateful, ran it into the ground. I had built Innovate Tech into a multi-million-dollar company, a feat they boasted about constantly. My vision, my work, my sacrifices. And they saw me as a liability, a loose cannon who needed to be reined in. "They're talking about taking over, Michael," she continued, her voice dropping to a whisper. "They think you're too big for your britches. Mom said you'd lost your way, that they need to step in to protect their investment and secure the family legacy. She even mentioned replacing you with someone more compliant. Honestly, I think they even considered me for a second, despite the fact I wouldn't know a server from a frying pan." A bitter laugh escaped her lips. My chest tightened as if someone had wrapped barbed wire around my lungs. The ground beneath me wasn't just shaking. It had opened up, revealing a chasm of deception. I stared at the family photo on Emily's mantelpiece, a meticulously staged Christmas picture from last year. I was there smiling. But suddenly I felt like a stranger. An afterthought. My fingers trembled so hard. The old ceramic mug I was holding clattered against the table. This was it. I had nothing left. No illusions left to cling to. My parents, the people who were supposed to be my foundation, were actively plotting my downfall. The betrayal was absolute, cold, and calculated. Every memory, every act of love twisted into a new sinister shape. The air in Emily's apartment felt thick, suffocating. Couldn't breathe. I barely registered her still muttering words as I stood up, the chair scraping loudly against the wooden floor. I needed out. I needed to think. My mind raced. Fragments of conversations, subtle glances, all clicking into place. It was like watching a slow-motion car crash, realizing all the signs had been there. And I had simply been too blind, too trusting, too desperate for their approval to see them. My first thought, surprisingly, wasn't anger. It was a terrifying sense of defeat. What could I do? They were my parents. They had power connections and the ingrained belief that they were always right for a terrifying hour. I felt utterly paralyzed, a marionette whose strings were about to be cut. I locked myself in my own office, the familiar of the servers, now a mocking symphony of my impending loss. I stared at the family photo on my desk. The one where I had been cropped out in my mind, my fingers tracing the outline of my smiling face, a ghost of a happier, more naive time. I considered giving up, walking away from it all. The thought was seductive, a dark velvet cloak of oblivion. But then something shifted, a cold ember of defiance flickered within me. I had built this. I had bled for this. No one, not even my own parents, was going to take it from me. My despair solidified into a hard, unyielding resolve. I grabbed my laptop, my fingers flying across the keyboard, searching for the best corporate lawyers in the city. The next morning, I found Sarah Jenkins. Her office, with its smell of old books, fresh coffee, and the subtle tang of lemon polish, became my sanctuary. Sarah was sharp, direct, but with an underlying empathy that was a balm to my raw nerves. I poured out the entire story, the years of subtle manipulation, the recent whispers, Emily's confession. She listened intently, her steady gaze and calm demeanor a lifeline in the churning ocean of my despair. "Michael, this isn't ungratefulness," she said, her voice firm, cutting through my self-doubt. "This is self-preservation. This is about boundaries, and they're trying to erase yours completely." Her words were like a bracing splash of cold water, waking me up. She laid out my precarious position with the current share structure. My parents, holding nominal board positions, had more power than I and my trusting naivete had ever realized. But she also offered a way out. "We need to move quickly and quietly," she explained, sketching diagrams on a whiteboard. "The best defense is a swift strategic offense. We can transfer a majority of your shares to a trusted third party. Someone loyal to you who understands your vision for Innovate Tech." My mind immediately went to David, my COO. David had been with me almost from the beginning. a coding wizard and a fiercely loyal friend. He'd lived through the ramen nights, the existential crises, the small triumphs. He understood Innovate Tech, truly understood it, because he had helped build it alongside me. The legal process was clinical, yet each signature on the transfer documents felt like a piece of my heart tearing. It was a necessary sacrifice, a brutal incision to protect the dream I had bled for. The silence in the office after David left, the newly signed documents tucked securely in his briefcase, was deafening, a heavy promise of what was to come. While Sarah worked her magic, I began my own quiet operation. I combed through old emails, finding veiled threats and dismissive remarks from my parents. I found records of their financial contributions, a mere drop in the ocean compared to the millions I'd poured into the company and the years of unpaid labor. I even unearthed a few old voicemails where my mother's voice, usually so sweet, turned icy, gaslighting me about decisions I had made. It was a painful, meticulous, archaeological dig into my own past, unearthing the bones of their deception. And then I found it, the original incorporation documents. I remembered a rushed meeting years ago with a junior lawyer who'd suggested a standard safeguard clause, Section 7 subsection B, something about founders' rights in the event of a hostile takeover. I barely skimmed it, trusting her, trusting them. Now as I read the precise legal language, a cold thrill ran through me. That tiny clause buried deep within the corporate bylaws was my silent scream against a future I always subconsciously feared. It was the whisper of a younger, more cautious me finally heard. The invitation arrived a week later, an embossed card requesting my presence at a family meeting to discuss Innovate Tech as future growth. The formality was jarring. A stark contrast to the casual Sunday dinners of years past, felt less like a gathering and more like a summons. I knew what it was, the trap. The air in my parents' sprawling, immaculately decorated home felt thick with unspoken expectations, heavy with the cloying scent of Martha's expensive lilies. Every antique vase, every polished surface seemed to with their self-importance. Emily was already there, perched nervously on the edge of a velvet armchair, her posture stiff, her gaze darting between me and our parents. She looked pale, her usual vibrant confidence replaced by a visible unease. Their family lawyer, Mr. Davies, a stern, impeccably dressed man whose suits always seemed a size too small for his inflated ego, sat beside them, a smug, knowing confidence etched onto his sharp features. He gave me a curt nod, a dismissive flick of his wrist. "Michael, darling," Mom began, her voice a saccharine purr that didn't quite reach her eyes. "We're so proud of all you've accomplished." The words felt like a pat on the head to a child, not an acknowledgement of years of tireless work, but as a family business. She paused, emphasizing family as if it were a sacred, unassailable word. "It's time for a more structured approach." Richard leaned forward, his voice firm, laced with the paternal authority he was accustomed to. "Martha and I, with our years of experience, have decided it's best to implement a new restructuring plan to ensure Innovatech's long-term prosperity." He launched into a meticulously rehearsed speech detailing how they would assume more direct control. I would be sidelined, reduced to a figurehead, perhaps an external consultant, a thinly veiled demotion designed to strip me of all real power. He even outlined how they would take over my primary office, the one I had built from scratch, and move me to a smaller, less prominent space. Their words dripped with condescension, a patronizing gesture before they delivered the death blow. The scent of lilies suddenly felt cloying, suffocating, as if the very air in the room was conspiring against me. They concluded, their faces expectant, anticipating my meek acceptance. They believed I was trapped, a dutiful son who would bow to their will, but I just smiled, a calm, almost chilling smile that spread slowly across my face. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat of anticipation and fear, but my expression remained serene. I reached into my briefcase, my fingers brushing against the crisp paper of the share transfer documents, the sensation sending a jolt of power through me. I pulled them out, crisp and official, and slowly, deliberately slid them across the polished mahogany table towards Mr. Davies. "There's just one small detail you seem to have overlooked," I said, my voice quiet but resonant in the suddenly silent room. "Your restructuring plan requires a majority vote, and you no longer have it." The effect was instantaneous and electrifying. My parents' faces contorted a grotesque carnival of emotions, from smugness to disbelief, then to raw explosive fury. Richard slammed his fist on the table, making the teacups rattle violently. Martha shrieked, her carefully composed facade crumbling into a mask of pure rage. "You've always been ungrateful," she shrieked, her voice shrill and unhinged. "This is a family business. Everything belongs to us, you ungrateful serpent. How could you betray your own flesh and blood?" Mr. Davies, their lawyer, looked visibly flustered, his face paling. He stammered, "This is unexpected, Mr. Vance." Accusations rained down on me, a barrage of venomous words. "Traitor!" Richard roared, his face purple with rage. "I knew we couldn't trust you." Amidst the chaos, my eye caught Emily's. She was pale, trembling, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and dawning understanding. Her usual guarded expression was gone, replaced by a raw vulnerability. Then something shifted. A flicker of resolve hardened her gaze in a rare courageous moment of defiance. Having witnessed her parents' true colors and my quiet strength, she made a crucial intervention. Her voice, though trembling, was firm, cutting through their parents' tirade like a sharp blade. "He's right, Mom, Dad," she said, her voice gaining strength with each word. "You were planning this. I heard you. You called Michael expendable. You said he was just a tool." She looked directly at our mother, her eyes blazing. "You said he'd lost his way and that I might be more compliant if things went south." Her words hit their parents like a physical blow, shocking them into momentary silence. Their mouths hung open, their accusations momentarily forgotten. Emily, the favored sister, the one who had always seemed to stand with them, had sided with me. She had validated my experience, exposed their deceit from within their own ranks. The silence that followed her confession was louder than any shout, echoing with the weight of shattered trust. I seized the stunned silence, my breath coming in calm even pulls. "And speaking of what belongs to us," I said, my voice steady, pulling out another document. "You might want to look at the original incorporation document, specifically Section 7, subsection B." I slid a highlighted copy of the specific clause across the polished table. "This clause, which you both signed off on years ago, allows me as the primary founder to initiate a buyout of all non-founding shares at their original par value in the event of a documented attempt at hostile takeover or breach of fiduciary duty by board members." I calmly explained that their restructuring plan, combined with Emily's testimony and the evidence I'd gathered, constituted exactly that. This was the seed of self-preservation I had unknowingly planted years ago. A standard legal safeguard I'd agreed to at the insistence of a junior lawyer who'd said, "Just in case, Mr. Vance, it's always good to have a parachute." Now it had bloomed into my salvation. That tiny clause, buried deep within the corporate bylaws, was my silent scream against a future I always subconsciously feared. It was the whisper of a younger, more cautious me finally heard. My parents were utterly defeated. Their faces were a grotesque mixture of rage, disbelief, and dawning horror. Mr. Davies, their lawyer, could only shake his head defeated. Their threats became empty, their voices rasping, their carefully constructed control crumbling around them. Michael stood firm, a profound sense of calm washing over him amidst the storm. The scent of lilies now felt like a sweet, clean air, a breath of freedom. Their rage was a dying fire, its heat fading as their carefully constructed world crumbled. I finally understood what it meant to breathe freely. The family meeting ended not with a bang, but with the whimpers of defeated tyrants. My parents, red-faced and sputtering, eventually stormed out, leaving Mr. Davies to gather his papers and offer me a terse professional apology for the unfortunate misunderstanding. There was no misunderstanding. There was a hostile takeover attempt exposed and dismantled. The legal fallout was swift and decisive. With Sarah Jenkins' razor-sharp intellect and unwavering support, we initiated the formal processes to remove my parents from Innovateca's board and finalize the share transfer. We then proceeded with the buyout of their nominal shares at the low par value as stipulated by Section 7 subsection B. They attempted legal retaliation, of course, a flurry of accusations of fraud and breach of contract. Their initial lawyer, Mr. Davies, quickly bowed out, replaced by a more aggressive, but ultimately ineffective, litigator. Sarah easily countered their increasingly desperate claims with my meticulously gathered evidence. The damning emails, the clear audio recordings, and crucially, Emily's willingness to provide an affidavit. Their desperate legal threats were mere echoes in an empty hall, Sarah had calmly stated. "We've built an ironclad case, Michael, brick by painful brick." The financial implications for them were not catastrophic, but significant. They lost their nominal initial investment in Innovatec, a sum that, while small to the company's current valuation, represented a symbolic loss of control and future revenue. They had coveted more damaging, perhaps were the legal fees draining their coffers for a futile battle, but the larger blow, the one that truly cut deep, was the public humiliation. News of the family dispute, despite my best efforts to keep it quiet, inevitably leaked within our intertwined social circles. Initially, some friends and extended family accustomed to my parents' carefully curated image of benevolent patriarchs were sympathetic to the poor betrayed parents, but the truth, insidious and undeniable, began to spread. Emily, in quiet conversations with mutual friends, confirmed the manipulation, lending credibility to my narrative. I too spoke calmly, factually, without malice, allowing the objective truth to do its work. Slowly public opinion shifted. I gained unexpected allies, distant relatives, old family friends, Even some of my parents' former business associates who had perhaps seen glimpses of their true nature before. They offered quiet support, shared knowing glances, and validated my experience, confirming that I wasn't crazy, that this was a familiar pattern of narcissistic or toxic family dynamics. It was a painful social dissection, but necessary to lance the wound and allow it to heal. The most profound shift, however, occurred within my own closest relationships. My bond with Emily, fractured by years of subtle favoritism and unspoken resentment, began to heal. She came to my office a week after the legal proceedings concluded, looking small and hesitant. "I'm so sorry, Michael," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "For everything. For not seeing it sooner. For not standing up for you." We talked for hours, really talked. For the first time in years, she confessed her own struggles with our parents' control, her constant feeling of inadequacy despite their outward adoration. We found common ground in shared trauma and a new kind of honesty. Emily and I, bonded by shared experience and newfound transparency, started to build a bridge across the chasm our parents had created. It was fragile, but real. David, my COO, proved to be more than just a trusted partner. He was a true friend, a quiet rock through the storm. His unwavering loyalty and belief in my vision for Innovate Tech became a cornerstone of my new foundation. We worked closer than ever, not just as colleagues, but as collaborators driven by shared values. I began to actively cultivate a chosen family, a network of supportive friends, mentors, and colleagues who celebrated my true self, not the version my parents demanded. We shared meals, laughter, honest conversations, and none of it felt like a performance. My family was no longer defined by blood, but by unwavering support, mutual respect, and genuine connection. The immense, profound relief I felt after severing ties with my parents was indescribable. It was as if I'd been carrying a crushing weight my entire life, a boulder of expectations and subtle manipulation, and suddenly it was lifted. The constant pressure, the gnawing need for their approval, the subtle gaslighting that chipped away at my self-worth, all gone. I could finally breathe deeply, fully, for the very first time. The air tasted sweeter, the colors brighter, the of my servers, no longer a threat, but a comforting melody of progress. I was no longer performing for an audience of two. My relationship with Innovate Tech also transformed. It was no longer a desperate attempt to gain parental approval or prove my worth to them. It became a pure expression of my passion and vision. I dedicated myself to nurturing my team, fostering a healthy work environment, and focusing on ethical growth. The company thrived under my unfettered leadership, free from the external pressures and insidious manipulations that had once stifled its potential. Healing, however, wasn't instantaneous or linear. There were moments of sadness, of grieving the idealized family. I thought I had the family that never truly existed. Sometimes a casual remark from a friend about their own parents would trigger a pain of longing, a bittersweet ache for something I'd never known. I sought therapy, talking through the deep-seated trauma, understanding the patterns of emotional abuse, and learning to forgive myself for my past naivete. I embraced self-care, rediscovering hobbies I'd abandoned in my relentless pursuit of external validation. The scars remained, but they were no longer bleeding. They were a testament to battles fought and won, a map of my journey from victim to survivor. As for my parents, their carefully constructed social facade, once impenetrable, began to crumble. Their signature action of dismissing my contributions with a condescending wave or a cutting remark now rang hollow to those who knew the truth. They continued to live in denial, blaming me to anyone who would listen, twisting the narrative to portray themselves as the victims of an ungrateful son. But their power over me was gone. They were left with their gilded cage, their material wealth, and their sprawling, immaculate home. But the birds had flown, leaving behind only the echoing silence of their own making. They had prioritized control and material gain over genuine connection, and they were left with the consequences. This wasn't just about a company. It was about reclaiming my life, my identity. It was about defining family on my terms, not on the toxic ones imposed by blood. It was about finding the courage to draw a line in the sand, even when it meant losing people I once believed were my entire world. It was a painful, necessary liberation. Have you ever had to draw a line in the sand with someone you love, even if it meant losing them? What did you learn about yourself in that process?